I'm going to be talking about push notifications in PWAs for Safari today. I've been working here at RightPoint for about 10 years now in software development in general for about 15. That includes college, so maybe shave off like 4 years of that. Primarily specializing in React Native. Most recently have a fascination with PWAs because boy, they're so close. Oh, it's going to be the year of the PWA anytime soon. And I will confess, I'm a Safari user. So this is relevant to me today. Cool.
It's a safe space.
It's a safe space. Yes, thank you. Who here knows what a PWA is? Okay, a lot of hands. Great. Who here has personally installed and used a PWA? Okay, a lot of hands. It's going to be the year of PWAs, guys. I promise. It's coming up soon. So if you're not familiar with a PWA, it's according to MDN, combines the best features of traditional websites with platform-specific apps, including the ability to develop with standard web text. So if you're a web developer and you want to get your space on the user's iPhone screen or Android screen, this is for you. It's also accessible directly from the web. So if you don't want to do that, fine. You just have to add a couple extra files and the users can use it if they want, but it allows you to leverage app features such as being fully installable. If you're a Google, Microsoft, or Meta person, you can make your code once for the web and make it available for the store. For those three platforms, not yet for Apple, but maybe someday soon. It's going to be the year of the PWAs, I promise. You can also have full screen, app icon, etc. Like I said, pin it to the user's home screen on their phone. Get those push notification icons, background content updates, offline modes, all these great things that folks come to know and love for native apps without any of the labor or ritual of having to go sign up for 2 different developer accounts, complete the 3 rights to become an Apple developer, pray to Steve Jobs nightly, otherwise your Apple will fail build, all that stuff that you hate with mobile development, you can avoid it with PWAs. Cool. So about service workers, this is the API and suite of functions that are standard within JavaScript and browsers that support it. That enables most PWA features, allows you to download, install, activate in like a general life cycle for the PWA. For this demo, I'm using a bootstrapping tool called Servist to kind of like set up a lot of that table setting for the service worker code and configuration. QR code download link there. Front row folks know where it's at because that's how you get close enough to download the QR code. But you can also do all this configuration that I'm going to be talking about by hand. Like I said, standard JavaScript calls. It's just a lot more labor if you don't have a bootstrapper to go in and say like, hey, I want all these functions, these configurations. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Cool. So some famous PWAs. A lot of you have used some. Hooray. I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought there might be 1 or 2 hands, but a couple of that come to mind just in my experience is GitHub, the Mozilla.org website, and my personal favorite, Spotify.org, or Spotify.com rather, the only PWA I personally have installed besides ones that I've written myself. So that screenshot there, that is the desktop version of Spotify's PWA, which looks very similar to the native app, be it desktop or downloaded through the App Store. Available for desktop only. It's a quirk of theirs. They don't want you using it on their phone. We'll talk about some of the caveats that maybe inspires that in a minute. But for me, my purposes, I love the web version. It's light, it's friendly, it's great. Cool. Some caveats for PWAs. Another QR code if you're interested. I love those. It's going to be the year of the QR code, folks. We didn't already have one of those in 2021. There's checkered browser support for various web worker APIs. So a function such as like background downloading, which might work in Google Chrome, might not work in Chromium Edge or Firefox or Safari. So it's kind of a checkered support in terms of what APIs you can use and like how your app will function on different browsers. This QR code here takes you to a virus. Actually, it takes you to the Can I Use website to see what service worker APIs are available per browser. But there's also checkered browser support for version. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today was introduced in Safari after iOS update 16.4. So Safari on iOS before that won't work, but Safari on iOS after that will. So frustrating landscape to develop for, but it is an option for you, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons. Again, varying supported config per browser. So an icon size that is supported for Apple may not be supported for Android. You might need a specific one for desktop versus mobile. Lots of different caveats there, different screen sizes that can be complicated to support. I did read an interesting article recently that said like you only need 3 fave icons, and I'm like, what is this heresy? But I haven't tested that in a while. So your mileage may vary. Again, like varying execution methods per browser, you might have to detect what the user is accessing your website on to determine how best to install the app or guide them how to install the app. So caveat there. There's also a high barrier to install and adopt PWAs over either native web sites or apps. So it might be harder for a user to understand like the multi-step process to install a PWA when they're used to just going to their favorite app store of choice, typing in Spotify or whatever and clicking download. And we'll show that in a minute. So some tips, tricks, and pitfalls. In my experience developing PWAs, it's best done using desktop Chrome, Edge, or Firefox. So you get all of your developer tools that you're familiar with and happy to use. Then you test on Safari because everyone who's developed any website for Safari knows it sucks. And then finally, last but not least, you test on mobile to make sure all the functionality you've proven out on those other web or browsers still work. Testing on multiple browsers and devices, always a plus. You don't want to build out something entirely on Chrome, spend like multiple weeks and months and hours building something only to find out it doesn't work at all in Firefox or Safari, as this is the case may be. And I also recommend running your PWA on an unusual port number or being sure to unregister it when you complete your effort, because service workers are notorious for caching CSS, JavaScript, and other things that you might be using elsewhere. So if you're using up a common port, you might find that stuff is not refreshing when you expect it to, and you might spend half an hour to an hour trying to figure out why your latest changes aren't propagating. Ask me how I know. Your browser may also block notifications if the URL is suspicious. As an example, I've got the screenshot here from an app that I'm going to show you in a minute that I deployed via Vercel because it's so easy and it's a common attack vector. No shade. If the browser that you're using suspects that it might be like a suspicious link, they might block your notifications or other PWA features unless you opt in. So look for little tells in the address bar or pop-up notifications or anything that might say something's going wrong, just to kind of like do a sanity check to see if something's gone wrong between here and there. Cool. So the demo app. I'll leave this one up a little bit longer so people can scan if they want. This is allegedly a working demo. Probably makes the most sense if you're on an iPhone, but I'm pretty sure it works on Android. I did test this twice. I did follow my own rules. Or you can type in that URL down there at the bottom, and I'll share this in the chat after. And for any folks who want to grab me after if they want to see it down the line. In terms of the code that's backing this is also a URL QR code that you can find, or just find my GitHub profile at github.com/joem-rp and look for Service Workers Safari to find the source code for this demonstration today. 7 minutes and a half. Oh gosh, I'm going to go over. So about the demo, it's just a blank app that I created with Create Next app. I'm using Service Worker for config, which currently supports Next and Vite. I think I'm saying that right. If not, don't sue me. But if you're not using one of those, like I said, you can use Service, or not Service, but you can configure your service workers manually. Then I deployed it via Vercel. So what you're seeing here in the background is a demonstration of the app as it should flow, as well as the install process. So you see for iOS, it's multifaceted. You have to go to the share sheet after going to the website, pin it to home, and then you're going to have the APIs available to actually enable some fun PWA stuff like push notifications, which we're showing today, which look at that. It looks like a real push notification. Oh my gosh. How can I put this on my website, Joe? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's going to be the year of the PWA, I promise. So setting up Service. This is, like I said, the bootstrapping tool that I chose for my project just because it supports Next.js. You can see there's a variety of configuration details set up here that we don't necessarily need to worry about. Things like what types of pages we should cache, when we should cache. Should the service worker try and activate right on navigation, or should we, in this case, register the worker manually? And other such things. Again, if you're familiar with PWAs, which a surprising number of you are, I'm so excited. You're probably familiar with that and how you can make that function. So we're going to gloss over that, and you can check out the repo after. In terms of the manifest, this is an important part. If you want to see that happy little icon at the top of your browser that says install this web page as a PWA, you need everything here in the top right. Yes, that's how directions work, even when I'm facing the screen. And manifest.json includes important things like the ID/location of your service worker, the start URL, name, a short title that's going to show up in the tab bar, a description, and importantly, an icon. If you don't provide an icon, your browser will never in a million years show you that you can install the service worker, and you might spend half an hour to an hour trying to figure out why it won't install. Ask me how I know. You also have to add that manifest to your metadata. So if you are familiar with like traditional HTML development and the web on the website of the house, a manifest includes some information about how your website appears, including like that fave icon that we talked about earlier. Be sure to have a link to the relative path of your manifest or direct URL, if that makes more sense, to include all that data that you provided so carefully in the manifest.json. If you don't provide it, you can't install your PWA. Ask me how I know. Oh, and that QR code there is a link to the required functionality on MDN to make your PWA installable. So all those props that you need. We'll check that out later. Cool. So I said we were going to register our service worker manually, and we'll do just that. Here on the example repo that I provided in page.tsx, aptly named, I'm calling the Service registration through the window property. Otherwise, if you're not using Service, I think it's just called service worker that you can still access through window dot. But again, service is just a little shortcut there. And then we're taking our registration and saving it to our app state in React Native. You could also set it to like a global variable in just plain JavaScript. We're going to need that later. It's an important, so keep that in mind. So here we are manually activating our service worker. I'm doing it just in like a standard use effect that starts at the start of the life cycle. Might make more sense for your purposes to do it in like a specific button click or some other user action that like drives the registration of that service worker rather than just when the user visits the website. So now that our worker is registered, there we are, we're adding it to app state. Let's take a look at what this looks like as the developer experience. We can test our work here by going to our developer tools. If you dig through the menu, there should be an application specific tab. You should see something in manifest. You should see something that says service worker. And then importantly, if you've done all those things that I said, you should see a cool little icon that may vary by browser that suggests you can install. I think Google Chrome, even on the desktop, will prompt you, but that's one of the rare exceptions. Most browsers do not. Can I seek in here? I'm also going to call out two features here. Make sure you have your service worker set to update on reload. Otherwise, if you make any changes to your service worker configuration, either in Service or by hand, it's not going to propagate until you clear out the service worker. And also, bypass for network is an important tick to check for both Chrome, Chromium-based engines, and Firefox support this functionality so that when you make changes to your code, be it CSS, JavaScript, make sure those propagate immediately because the service worker is otherwise going to intercept your call from your local development environment and serve what it has cached, which is old. And you may spend half an hour to an hour figuring out why your code won't update. Ask me how I know. So let's get to the fun part. We're going to ask for permission to send a push notification. Oh my gosh, we're so close. It's going to be the year of the push or PWA, folks. I can feel it. It's so close. So here I've got a couple lines of code. The one at the top is the most important for checking if notification APIs are supported. Three things we're checking for here. Last in that stack is we're seeing if the window supports the push manager API. We're also seeing if the navigator has notification property within it. We're also making sure that we have a service worker. And last but not least, just for Next.js or anything that is similar, we're checking that the window does not equal undefined. I found out when I tried to, after a couple hours of building this code and trying to deploy it, that the build function of Next.js was checking for window. And none of these other things were true during build. And it would bomb and fail and say, try again. So that's just a check for Next.js. You may or may not need that, but it doesn't hurt to check. How do you know? Oh, how did I know? I looked at the error logs and scowled. Yes. So two other just example features for PWAs that I included up here is geolocation, like if you need to find the user's address to give them directions. I think Google Maps can do this as well. They're going to ask you for like that permission. That's a suite of checks you can ask to make sure you can do that. And then storage is much more common API. I think it technically falls outside the service worker domain. Actually, I lied. It's right there in my code if I just open my eyes and see. But that's for if you want to like cache data or information locally besides like the usual, CSS, JS, that sort of thing. So like if you wanted a specific JSON payload that describes user data next time they revisit, that's a tip and trick to make that happen. Okay, cool. So assuming is notify is supported, all those things that you see above are true. We can call the notification API and say request permission. And then once we return a result from that asynchronous request, we can affect some app state. I'm crudely setting set is push granted into app state and then reloading the window wholesale. A little bit of a brute force method there, but it makes sure that like everything's fresh and clean and has all the permissions we're expecting at that point. At this point, if you are on an iPhone and you have done all these steps, when you call your request permission, you should see something that looks like a permission request. PWA is going to delegate that request to the OS, who's going to then present it in the way users are familiar with, just like if they have a native app from the App Store. Again, Spotify, great example. They're familiar with this. Again, as a caveat from someone who's developed for iOS personally, you can only ask this once. So if the user says don't allow at this point, then they have to go to the settings to personally enable those features. So choose carefully before you call this command, usually with something called a pretty please, which is, like a fun design that says like, hey, we're going to send you push notifications and here's why, pretty please. And so then at that point when they say, yeah, I'm ready to see what you have about push notifications, then you can call this and show this notification prompt. Yes? If they say don't allow, would you be able to check that inside of PWA? Yes. So at that point, it would behave much like a native app development. You can still call request permission, but instead of you see here on the third or fourth line there, it says result equals granted. It'll say result equals denied. And at that point, you can direct them to their settings to enable that manually. So you're not like out of the wood. You're not banned forever, but it's a little bit harder to get that permission. Yes. So like same with a normal app, if you ever denied push notifications and then you try and enable it later, you can jump to the settings and say like, here's the push notification settings for this installed PWA, which is based on a protocol that you define that it's sort of like HTTP, but it's not. So it'd be like, in this example, would be Safari : / or some such, and then like settings or whatever, and that would take you to the settings app. So cool. Let's build a push notification. Let's do it. We're so close, and I'm only a little bit over. I'm gonna try and go fast if I haven't been going fast enough. So if you're gonna, like me, you're gonna take your favorite search engine and say, how do I send a push notification with PWAs? You'll probably come to this MDM article that is linked there in the QR code to say, hey, here's the notification constructor, and here's how it works. Guess what? It's a trap. Don't use this. It's not gonna work on iOS. It will work on your desktop browser. It will work on Android, but when you try and run it on Safari for iPhone, it won't work. And you'll spend half an hour to an hour trying to figure out why not. Ask me how I know. So let's build a push notification for real. Here, we're actually going to use that registration that we set into our app state earlier, and then call the show notification function, and then pass some details there, including a notification title, some options that describe the push notification. This goes into some of the content I said earlier about how like different browsers support different configurations. So there's a suite of options that are available for PWAs that Safari may support some, Edge may support others, Chrome probably supports all of them because they're typically on the cutting edge of everything. And Firefox is probably none of the above. So you've got like a four-way Venn diagram of frustration and delight. But oh, wait, registration.show notification, that is actually going to show your push notification at this point. And if it's on an operating system that supports it, that's going to increase your badge count. So just for my purposes, I'm also tracking that in my state and in dealing with that later. Down below, you can see how I'm using the navigator to actually clear the app badge. That's actually going to take that badge counter, because if you're like me and you're inbox 0, you don't want a badge, you don't want to see a number, you don't want to see a little red dot. And if you don't have any way manually in your code to clear the badge, it stays there forever until your user uninstalls the app, which we don't want. So a little tip there about how to clear the app badge using the navigator, then check your registration. Again, the thing that we set in state earlier. And then iterate over those notifications and clear them out manually to make sure that we're like all clear state and the user is not uninstalling our PWA in frustration. Cool. So the finished product, I have Android and iOS side by side here to kind of show what the different install process looks like. If you hit the QR code earlier, you should have seen something similar. And if not, that's why you never do a live demo. But you can see there's a little bit of variation in terms of like what's showing up for the push notification, how the PWA gets installed, and all things you might need to account for in your development. Rather than just like trust the user to know. It might make sense to say like, hey, we noticed you're on Safari. Click here to see how to install us on your home screen and become best friends, which I did not do because I didn't have time. I spent like 30 minutes to 3 hours troubleshooting trivial stuff. Ask me how I know. So that's the finished product. But that's just a local push notification, which is great if you're like setting a reminder or a timer or something of that effect. But what if you want to send a push notification from the server? Well, it's going to be very similar, at least from the client side. So we're going to take our registration. That's the service worker registration from earlier. Make sure we have that, the push manager property on that, and then call permission state to make sure our permission is granted. From that point, we're going to attempt to call a subscription function from the push manager, which is going to send a ECDSA P256 encoded application server key, which probably won't be as pretty as Hello World, to a known entity, which is going to come back with some subscription information provided by a server that hopefully you own. Hopefully it's not someone else's, but you never know. And that's going to include some information like the push subscription endpoint, the expiration time of your push subscription. So at some point, you're going to have to like request that subscription again, just to make sure that all the information is the most current, as well as like some other stuff that we're not going to worry about because there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be glossing over here. It's kind of like drawing an owl. Is the important thing to know. 2 easy steps. Step 1, draw a couple circles. Step 2, draw the rest of the push notification services. Okay, so at the high level though, the process for remote push notifications is the client gets permission to subscribe, which we saw with that OS notification. We're going to send the registration to our server or a push service that sends back an auth key. We're going to log that registration info in a database, so we have a list of users that we can notify later. And then the server is going to send message info such as clients, recipients, and delivery info like date time if you want to send it at a later date, or like schedule it for when they're awake rather than like 2 a.m. All that information is going to a push service for delivery, which is going to use a particular protocol, which I had noted in my notes and then deleted. So I'm not going to talk about it. But OneSignal is an example of a web push service that you can subscribe to. You can also build it yourself. Sounds like a lot of work when money is free. That's not true. But the maintenance of building your own push service is high. This is like OneSignal as an example is like a proxy, if you will, for like Google Cloud, GCFM, Google Cloud Firebase messaging, which is for Android specific push notifications in the actual OS from the App Store, and Apple push notification services, which is the peer for iOS. So if you're familiar with those processes, which who isn't, then this should be very familiar for you. Great. Cool. I ripped through it. I was only 8 minutes over. I tried so hard, Heather. I'm so sorry, but that's my time. I will be sharing all these links in chat for anyone who's online. And if you want to grab me after, I can give you some of these QR codes. This one, I think, goes to that GitHub repository for later reference. So thank you all.
Okay, legal development. What developers want to know or need to know? I'm Howard, way back when, and I have probably 45 years of development experience. I know it doesn't look like it, but that's what happens when you spend all your time in a basement without the sun coding. I've got a bachelor's and a master's from computer engineering from Syracuse, and a master's in business administration from SMU. I've been a developer, a consultant, started with IBM, went from there to EDS, went through Y2K. After Y2K, there was a glut of us programmers, so us higher cost guys got let go, and became a photographer for a while, ran my own business. And then a while back decided, I'm doing a lot of coding for photographers and this sort of thing. So maybe I really do belong in the coding space. At least you people understand me. So in the course of these things, I've also written some books about coding and bring us kind of today. My first computer, I was telling somebody earlier, had a whopping memory of all of 8K. Yeah, 8K, and that was considered groundbreaking. The computer was a digital PDP-12, stood about this high, this deep, and was about this long from me to the front row. That was mid 70s, mid to late 70s. I graduated high school in 79, and my high school was very progressive in that they actually had a computer. And the reason we had a computer is because the doctoral thesis of one of the teachers that was there was the uses of computers in education. And the state liked his doctoral thesis so much, they gave him a computer to play with. Yeah. All right. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I have to put this legal disclaimer in. And I see our lawyer smiling, so I must be saying something right. I'm not giving you advice. If you have questions related to real situations that you are encountering now, you absolutely have to talk to a professional in that field. I'm just going to be giving you enough information to know that you need to talk to somebody and be able to talk to them somewhat intelligently to communicate what your problem is so that they can give you the help you need. Also enough information for you to stay out of trouble. We're going to talk about employment classifications, business structures, contracts, non-disclosure agreements, non-compete agreements, copyright, data privacy, legal risks, compliance, resources, and questions. The way this talk originally came about is when I was a photographer, we would be out there in our photographer forums talking back and forth, and invariably some photographer would get on and say, somebody stole my work and is showing it on their website, claiming it's their own. And then when they were confronted about it, the response was invariably, it's my developer's fault. My developer did it. So all the poor developers were getting the blame for all these copyright infringements. So it became one of these things I thought developers needed to know. And as I went along, I realized there was a lot more information that developers need to know in their life. Important thing is most of you are W-2 employees. What that means is you work full-time for somebody or part-time. They pretty much have control of what you do during your working hours. More importantly, they hold your they have a tax withholding. You get benefits from them. They control the work, where it's done, how it's done, when it's done. They provide your tools. They reimburse you for job-related expenses. And so on. At the end of the year, when it comes time for filing taxes, your employer will give you a W-2 form. You take that, you do with it whatever you need to do to file your taxes, whether you put it in the software, you do it by hand, you give it to your accountant, but that's the information that goes there. Conversely, we have contractors, which are 1099 employees, because that's the form you get. Basically, a contractor is brought on to do a specific task. They have duties and responsibilities, but the employer or the hiring party doesn't have control. Right now, I'm on contract to CompTIA. I have a list of things that I need to accomplish, but I can choose to work on them from 8 in the morning until noon and then take a 4-hour break and then come back later in the day. I can choose not to work that day as long as I'm meeting the deadlines and giving the work to them and making them happy. They have no say. They can't even force me to go to a meeting that they schedule at whatever time. That's the so that's it. But financially, there's a piece of this. As a contractor, they're not paying for any benefits. Anytime that I don't work, if it's a billable hour, I don't get paid for hours that I don't work because I can't bill it. If I did, that's fraud. On the tax side, and this is kind of important, there are taxes that are paid on your behalf by employers that you may not see. There's a Social Security. There's actually the employer side and there's the employee side. And if the employer does not pay it, you have to pay it yourself. And there's also withholdings. The IRS used to use what's known as a 20-factor test. There was a series of questions that they used to determine whether or not you were an employee or a contractor. It's actually to the advantage of a company to define you as a contractor. It costs them less money because they're not paying both halves of the Social Security and they're not having to have to pay for your benefits. So there's a lot of what they call this misclassification. There's a form, IRS form SS8, that if you are ever in a situation where you're not sure if you're an employee or a contractor or what's going on, you go ahead and you fill out this form, you send it to the IRS, and they will come and they will give you a determination. And it may be that you're a contractor and everything's fine. It may be that you're an employee, in which case they're going to be talking to the employer. Contractor has responsibilities. You have to pay quarterly estimated taxes because you're not having withholding done from your paychecks. That line that, when you get paid by your contractor, there's no line that's comparable on your paycheck that you say federal withholding and state withholding. Not there. So at a minimum, you have to, as a contractor, remember quarterly to file with both your state and the federal government your estimated tax and pay those. You get to negotiate your contract. You can specify you want to submit invoices every 2 weeks. You can specify how many hours you're going to devote to the project. Whatever. It's a negotiation. Remember, though, they can always walk away from the negotiation just as you can. You get to decide what your business structure is. And I know I had a little conversation about somebody about an LLC, but basically there are several structures you can use. Sole proprietorship, a partnership, limited liability corporation, small corporation, which is commonly referred to as an S-corp, or a large corporation or corporations known as a C-corp. Your IBMs, your Googles, and so on, those are going to be your C-corps. When I had my photography business, I was an S-corp. That was the decision that I came to between my accountant and myself to determine that was the best solution and the best organization for my financial situation. So if you've got a business or you're starting up, you got to talk to your accountant to figure out which way to go. You get various protections. Yes, sir.
Why the S-corp?
I don't actually recall, but I do know that that's what was advised to me by the accountant. And I think it had to do with the flow through of the taxes. Yes. He wanted to know whether or why I chose an S-corp versus an LLC. The other thing that I will say is that when I incorporated as an S-corp, it was like 2002. And we're talking 20 some odd years later. And the one thing that you've got to be really cognizant about with the law is it evolves and it changes, and tax law changes constantly. And so what may have been right in 2002 because of changes today may not be the right decision. Today, given the same facts, my accountant might very well say you're better off as an LLC. Okay, sole proprietorship. It's very simple. You have complete control over the business and you have some tax benefits. You're only taxed once. The bad thing, your liability. And you're not really shielded. So if you make a mistake or you have a problem, somebody can come after you personally. It becomes difficult to raise capital, once again, because it's a personal thing. And the business is really dependent upon the owner. Once you walk away, the business is gone. Partnership, more cooks in the kitchen. You have pretty much the same thing, but you now are going to deal with interpersonal relationships and conflicts. If you got two people in the business, one of them's got to have the ability to make the final decision. Otherwise, you're going to run into something that's going to cause butting heads. And I know from watching the true crime stuff that's on TV, it can and has resulted in murder. Right, what you're liable for. There's limited liability corporation, which literally is what it says. It limits your liability. You still maintain your pass-through tax benefits. It's going to be more expensive than the previous two options to establish this structure, and it's a little bit more complex to operate. There's more accounting that has to be done. You get into corporations, now you have shareholders, but shareholders have very limited personal liability. It's easier to raise capital. You can keep a company going by selling the company, and it's not dependent on you. It's a little more costly and complex to create. There's more regulations. As soon as you become a corporation, you now have to file with the federal government for taxes, the state government for taxes, and you actually do get double taxed. There's the corporate tax, and then there's the shareholder distribution tax. Before you ask, when you're an S-corp, the way you avoid that is the IRS will not really be upset if you take a salary that's comparable to what a similar position would be in the general market. So as a photographer, I never earned enough profit so I could take everything as a salary. I either took it, if I did a wedding, I knew that wedding photographers in this area were getting $300 a wedding to shoot a wedding. So I would take $300 right away for shooting the wedding. And I knew that they got paid so much to process the pictures. So I took that. And by the time I got done, I had a very, very small profit that wasn't even, taxable. Or if it was really good, I took some losses.
How many projects did you have? Or just
I had like 2 or 3. I know there was one year I live in Schaumburg, and they have that's known as a residential rehabilitation grant loan. And to do that, you had to keep your 1040 income, your income below a certain threshold in order to qualify for that grant loan. but between my wife's salary and mine, we're going to go over it. But the nice thing is the loss from the business carried on to my 1040, my personal. So what I did, knowing that I want the following year, I was going to be applying for this residential rehabilitation grant loan, I prepaid a whole bunch of expenses to create a loss in that tax year to drive my net income down and qualify for the loans. And I'll tell you, it was worth it because it ended up, it's a 30-year note of $25,000 at 0% interest. Actually, Schaumburg just administers it for HUD. So it's actually a federal program. Okay, so I don't think we need to go into those. So basically summarize, you need to understand where your business is, what's best for you, and what your professional, whether it's your lawyer or accountant, your CPA, says is the best way for you to set up. If you're intending to grow this business and maybe you've got 3 employees now, but you think you're going to be a unicorn and have a couple hundred and you're going to be going out, well, you may want one structure versus something totally different. All right, contracts. I am never going to be able to cover everything on contracts in the next 5 minutes. Our lawyer's nodding his head because he spent 1 full semester in law school studying contracts. And even then, it didn't get him fully prepared for the bar exam. I know this. My daughter's going into her 3L year at law school. And I got contracts as part of my MBA when I took business law, because that was required for an MBA. Contracts are extremely complicated. There's every which convolution. You're just getting a little scraping off the surface. Contracts are sometimes defined based on their purpose or why they're formed. At the basic level, a contract is an agreement between 2 parties, and it creates a duty or a responsibility between the folks. There are several elements that make a contract: offer and acceptance, consideration. You have to have a meeting of minds, legal capacity, and it's not illegal. All right. I can't come up to you and say, okay, we have a contract. You're going to give me this and I'm going to do this for you. No, that's, there's no offer. However, if I come up to you and say, if you give me X and I'll do this for you, that's the offer and acceptance. If you say, yes, I agree, then that's the meeting of the minds. Then if you give me a down payment or you do something which is of value to you, let's say maybe you stop looking for another programmer or developer to fulfill the job you need, or so on, that can be consideration. Legal capacity is you have to be basically of sound mind. You have to have the ability and the maturity to enter into a contract so that somebody who is developmentally impaired does not have the capacity to enter into a contract because they don't understand necessarily what they're getting into. That's also why you end up with conservatorships as people get into dementia, because they've lost the ability to have a state of mind with the legal capacity to enter into a contract. And they really need somebody to manage their affairs. And oh, by the way, whatever we contract, it's got to be legal. It's got to be legal. I can't make an agreement that I'm going to deliver to you 10 grams of cocaine, let's say, that's not legal. So you can't have a contract for something that's illegal. Pardon me? I don't know, ask your lawyer. I honestly don't know the answer. This is the reason why lawyers go to law school and study contract law for a full semester. And it's like 6-8 contact hours a week. And I think between each class, they read a couple hundred pages. I'm sure there's been cases litigated about it. I'm sure there's precedent out there. I just don't know. And I'm going to leave it at that. Moving on, you'll get non-disclosure agreements. I know that that's been in the news lately a lot. But non-disclosure agreement? No, it's even more than that. It was the Trump hush money trial. Yes. Okay. Non-disclosure basically means you will not, or somebody will not release information. It is a type of contract. Thing you should realize is that as an employee, that very well could be in your employment contract. Your employment contract may have a lot of different things in it, one of them being a non-disclosure. I know, believe it or not, that when I started work from IBM way back when in '83, there was a non-disclosure agreement in there that basically said I would not release IBM secrets or talk about it to non-authorized people. If I was going to be giving a presentation to a group like this, I needed to take my talk and run it through their publicity department or so on, so that they could verify that the information that I was going to give would not hurt IBM's interests. Yeah, I'm long past working with them, and I do believe the statute of limitations is long past, because I don't think there was an in perpetuity in there, although I could be wrong.
You say the wrong thing,
Yep. Could also be in your contractor contract. Working for CompTIA, I've been involved with some things that I have created some works that I would dearly love to put in my portfolio and show off. However, because of CompTIA's concerns, they very specifically said this is part of non-disclosure. So it's there. It could be part of that. It could be as simple as something on, LinkedIn. I have a friend who works for Grumman, and it's even tighter because she deals with top secret information. And all she had to do was say she worked for Northrop Grumman. I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I can't disclose that." I said, "Okay, I get it." It's a secret project. So you need to be aware of that. And your liability personally, it could be anything from being fired, financial penalty, or in the case of something that's top secret, you can end up in jail.
There's also that people are losing their country to justify the fact that they just say it's news. Yeah. Last year. Yeah. Trying to get hired about that.
Non-compete, a little bit different. That can also be in your contract. It basically is protecting a employer from you going into business against them or taking their customer lists with them. It used to be a lot used with the professionals. doctors, lawyers, accountants, salespeople, people who would have client lists that if they move from one place to another, the original business would lose, revenue. It has become very overused. This is an area of law that there's a lot of legislation going on. I've seen that in the news. They are beginning to crack down on the overuse of it. Traditionally, a non-compete must be reasonable, even for a professional. In the case of a doctor, because I know my doctor has moved from one practice to another, they limit those to a specific geographic area, and it's usually within 20, 25 miles of the office, and it's only for a year. So he was in an office in, I want to say Bartlett for a while, and he left that practice. He ended up for a year in an office by the Central DuPage Hospital so that he could practice, but he was outside the non-compete area. And once that year was over, he moved back within a couple miles of the first office. That was so he could get around the non-compete. Yes, sir.
I do believe they're no longer legal. They just passed. Yeah, they're no longer.
Well, I think it's state dependent. No?
UNFTC is banned, but they're currently challenged. As you said before, this is advice, not to the
Right. And the other thing I said is law is constantly evolving. Copyright. This is one of my favorites. Intellectual property. As I mentioned earlier, I became real interested in IP when I was a photographer, because to me, somebody's worked hard to create something, and when you're using it without their permission in any way, shape, or form, you're stealing. If you had a carpenter who built or was building a cabinet and had it in his showroom and saying, okay, this is what I built, and somebody came in and took it away from him, that's theft. But as a photographer, if I take it and I put my picture on a website and somebody takes it and puts it somewhere else or uses it, even though it may not have cost me anything financially, they're still stealing something. Copyright and intellectual property basically says who owns this creation. And it can be a program. It can be a textbook. It can be a novel. It can be photographs. It can be a map. Believe it or not, out there, developers are always getting the blame when things show up that shouldn't. You have to pay attention. GitHub is a place where people put repositories out there, but they may still own the copyright to it. Just because it's on GitHub does not mean that you have free use of it. And this can get you in trouble. I don't know if anybody remembers, but a while ago, the internet came to a halt because a developer who created this, it was basically a function. It was like 12 lines of code. It was, but it had gotten integrated into so many different packages. And through a dispute, he decided, well, if you're going to play that game, I'm going to take my code and I'm going to go home. Had every right to. And then they discovered how many different applications this was used in. And it was like in Facebook and in Google and, YouTube. And, I mean, the whole internet went down because of it. And people discovered, yeah, those 12 lines of code were kind of important. He ended up getting his way.
So a lot of, especially front frameworks now and back frameworks as well, you install a lot of packages. On the front end, there's like no packages. So when you do like npm install, then a lot of package managers will allow automatic
Okay, thank you. I'm left pad. That's right. And all it did, I think, was padded the left-hand side to make sure that it was the correct length, so that if it was a number field with 5 digits and you had a number that was less than 10,000, it added leading zeros. And we're laughing about it, but it broke the internet. Yes, sir.
It's a general thing. People don't know. It's also worth taking some time to look at the notion of copy left. But you get in real trouble with things like any public license, you incorporate some code that's under copy left, and suddenly all of your code is public, not public domain, but open source. Big thing to look for for libraries to solve. Social has
Yeah. You know, and this is a big thing, you know, especially if you're developing for some company and you grab a package to use it and it doesn't get, and nobody knows all of a sudden you use it, suddenly your company's software could be subject to copyleft, you know, rules and so on.
I mean, for specific questions, again, you can consult generally copyright protects the form in which an idea is expressed. The expression was reduced to print or data, but it can extend beyond that.
Okay. All right. So basically, if you own the copyright, and for the books that I've written, for the photographs I've taken, I have a copyright. Copyright goes into effect the instant it's created, but it gets registered with the Library of Congress. And I'm not going to go into that. That's all well documented on the Library of Congress website as to how you apply for and obtain your copyright registrations. The owner of the copyright determines the usage. Am I going to sell it? Am I going to lease it? Am I just going to hold it on to myself and nobody ever gets to see it? So I have total, absolute control of those copyrights. Your employer may actually own the copyrights to that which you develop. Once again, that goes into your employment contract when you signed it. Once again, when I started with IBM, they said that any intellectual property that I created was theirs. However, there was a caveat in there that said that if I created something and they deemed it non-related to their business, they would give me, you know, let me have the copyright. So basically, if I wrote a child's story, which was not related to IBM, they would let me have the copyright. Yes, sir.
For what it's worth, many states have specific statutes about this. Illinois is one of them. Everyone can look that up if they want to see the test for whether or not it's yours or the company's, and that's by default for employee. And for independent contractors, by default, it's work product. The company owns your work. So read the contract, it's probably not yours as you're going to see.
Just assume that company paid for you to read it and do it and stuff.
Yeah. And if you want it to be yours, make sure you do it off property, off time, and so on. There are some exceptions to copyright. I'm just going to hit them real briefly. Education, criticism and commentary, news, or if you take a transformative work. I'm briefly going to say these are very complex issues. I know, I don't know if my daughter's taking a class on this, but I'm sure, because none of these 4 points is more important than the other. And I know that the judge has to factor in all of these when they decide if a copyright has occurred, infringement has occurred. You know, it's real obvious when somebody goes into a movie theater and has their phone is going like this and they're videotape or taping the or recording the movie that's up there. Yeah, that's an obvious infringement. But there's a guy out there, Shepard, Daxshire. Anyway, he has been known for taking photographs and then supposedly transforming them and creating artworks. I happen to know one of the photographers that sued him and won because he did not transform the original work far enough away from her original photograph. And, you know, she's trying to collect. It's up to the judge. I mean, it's just the case. This is probably as good a time as any to say, you want to stay out of the courtroom as much as possible. If you want to be entertained, yeah, go into small claims court. Judge Judy has nothing on what happens. But in reality, you want to stay out of court. If you can settle a case, if you can reach an agreement, you should. Anytime you go into court, and I've been in court five, 6 times for different reasons. None of them, I'm talking about even traffic infractions, but it's a business decision. Is it worth the fighting? Or can I get out of this less than it would cost me to pay the lawyers to get out of it? And if there's a settlement that makes business sense to take, you take it. And that's part of the reason you have a lawyer in the courtroom, is because they are not emotionally attached to your case. You are. And I don't care whether it's a simple copyright, not even some, it's a simple trespassing. Somebody came on your property and damaged something versus, you know, a personal injury that gets even, lawyers are dispassionate because they've got to make good decisions for you. And that's why you're paying them. That's why they're the professionals on this. And all right, with the dawning computers in around 1998, we had the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It did several things. It gave us protections for online. It made it so that people who circumvented technology, i.e. hackers, could be held accountable, and prevented or said prohibits tampering with copyrights online. Functionally, if I own a copyright and I see one of my pictures being used on the internet or text that I created being used on the internet, and I don't want to go hunting because, you know, a lot of times these owners are hidden behind anonymity. All I have to do is file a takedown notice with the web host saying that I am the owner. They don't have permission, have to sign it. I don't know if I have to notarize it or not. It's been a long time since I've seen one of these. And then the web host is required to take it down immediately. Then the people that own the site have their remedies, and you could end up in court. You may not.
Also, a lot of YouTubers speak against each other. They don't like their content.
Yeah.
The NCA, the other YouTuber, and then YouTube has a three-strike policy. So they do it enough to the YouTuber and end up literally taking down the YouTuber's account.
So yeah, the websites, I mean, they're like a black family.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, with every tool, it can be abused. Things for developers to be aware of is data privacy and HIPAA. And it's HIPAA. There's 2 A's, not 1. And everybody thinks it's like happy with 2 P's. And people misuse this. What people, you know, you're out in this public and your friend may know that you suffer from anxiety and they broadcast it to the world and you say, oh, that's a HIPAA violation. Nope. Your friend is not covered under HIPAA. It covers healthcare professionals or people that are in associated industries. It basically protects your personal health information from dissemination. Now, what it does prevent is from my wife coming home and saying, we had a celebrity in the operating room and it was so-and-so, and this is what we did. That's a HIPAA violation. As people who are in here, we have an obligation that if we're dealing with health information, not to disclose it, to take the utmost data privacy protections on it, meaning a practice might be to encrypt the data, put it on restricted access, put the permissions to access it on a tiered level. So maybe you can get the patient's name at this level, but to see it elsewhere, you got to have this level. You've got to take protections on it. And there are other standards that have come into play. You have these European Union's data standard, and California has another standard. My advice is to the developer, rather than trying to maintain different standards for wherever you are, figure out which one is the most restrictive, what the best practices are, and code to that. And personally, I think rather than each of these companies that gets hit with a hacker having to have to pay for 1 year of credit monitoring, they all should be paying some sort of tax or fee, and we should all get it free for the rest of our lives, because that's how frequently we're getting, hack notices or data breach notices. And, states are constantly changing the legislation as we're learning. Yes, sir.
I was just going to throw out one thing that's worth noting is you don't really have control as to whether you fall under these things. It's down to who your users are. Since you're a public site on the internet, anybody decides to access your stuff, they've now made you subject to that. So I agree with your assessment. Finding the most restrictive one.
Right. So for you, the important thing is compliance involves risk analysis, access controls, and robust policies. Basically need to know. HIPAA violations are taken very, very seriously. Penalties can range anywhere from 1,000 to 50,000 a year per violation. Anytime it's violated. So if my wife came home yesterday and said this about this patient, that's one violation. She comes home tomorrow and talks about another patient, that's a second violation.
There's one Instagram post or like Twitter post, a list of clients that had one violation.
Probably depends on the lawyer that's filing the suit. It's a question of whether he wants to have 34 count indictment or one. The Children Online's Privacy Protection Act. This is important too. This controls how a website handles the data of minors or children under the age of 13. Got to have parental permission if you're dealing with children's websites. Big, big thing. So if you're taking registrations on any site and you don't check to see that they're an adult, guess what? You could be subject to COPA. These are the common legal risks that we as developers have: IP infringement, breach of contract, data privacy, employment and labor law violations, the open source violation we talked about, consumer protection. Didn't even really touch on that one. If you're designing a site and you know that the information is fraudulent or incorrect, and it's inducing people to spend money or do something, you've got a consumer protection violation. Mitigate your risks. Have your contracts reviewed by lawyers. Understand them. Just because you're presented with an employment contract or a contractor contract does not mean you have to sign it right away. Make sure you take the time and you get a full understanding of what you're signing. And this doesn't even just go for employment contracts. I will extend it. Any contract you sign, if you're buying a new car, if you're buying a house, if you're leasing, if you're getting a service, if you're hiring somebody to build something for you, you're getting married and you've got a venue that you're hiring, you're hiring in food. Make sure you understand the contract. As a photographer, I posted my contracts on the website so people could see them in advance. I went over them. I gave them time to, if they wanted to, they could take it home and discuss it. But don't just sign a contract because it's put in front of you. In terms of your licenses of the software you use, understand what it says. And then you got to periodically review it, because just because the release that you used yesterday had one set of agreements, they can very well change it for the next release. And it could go from, open source to a copy left. It could totally change. It could change that says, okay, we were free before for everybody, but now it's only free for individual users. Corporate has to pay. I'm sorry. Yes, but when you updated, you went through a process where they could very well have said you now agree to the new user agreement, the new license, as part of the update of your software. So make sure you have proper license and you audit those. Have security compliance protocols to make sure your data is secure. Audit, and audit some more. Make sure you're doing what you need to do. Ethical considerations. It's not legally required on some of these things. It makes you a nice person. Share what you know and teach others. Be inclusive. Respect the IP of others. And just keep learning. Some resources, irs.gov. Your lawyers, Library of Congress. Are there any questions? Okay, OpenAI, that's a whole can of worms right now. As with any new technology, we have not figured out literally A, how it's working, and B, what the legal rights are. A lot of the AI that is out there does go out to websites and grabs material and then stores it and then uses it to complete responses. Is it a copyright infringement? Is it transformative enough? Does it violate user agreements of the sites that came from, and on and on and on? And quite frankly, until we get the Supreme Court to rule on some of these things, we don't know. Yeah.
One, I think OpenAI was able to do a lot of things that are questionable just because there were no regulations for them to comply with early on. now with the EU AI Act, there are regulations that they will have to comply with, and I think that's going to be very challenging for them.
Right.
To be the situation, you have to look at like, what are the EU AI requirements saying we need to have for governments, and like what are the harshest, like what you said earlier,
Most restrictive.
Most restrictive, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't think any of us know the answer. But I will tell you this, in terms of laws that are out there, a lot of times laws are created because people took advantage of situations that existed. Then society or pieces of society said that was not right, and they created the structure and the rules to stop that or to regulate it. And you know, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was a response back then. Now you're seeing the AI response now, and it's going to be true for anything. If we ever develop faster than light travel, if we ever develop time travel, people are going to go back and abuse it at first, and then we're going to have the regulation to, okay, you can't go back and kill somebody's grandfather or something like that.
I forgot to say this, but I know there is a way to opt your website out of being for OpenAI. I don't know how to do it, but if you look.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.